this recognition, especially given by the union at a union conference, which is by far my favorite meeting and conference in the year. So I'm very happy to receive this recognition, but I also have the certainty that this is product not only of my work, but of a big team who's working on TB research in Manisa in Mozambique. So I want to thank all of them for their work, and also to our community in Manisa, who has engaged very much with our activities as a research center. I also wanted to thank three people. I wanted to thank Dr. Pedro Alonso, who provided the opportunity to go to Mozambique and to work on TB research. I also want to thank Dr. Eusebio Macete, who is the CISM director in Mozambique, for his support on all my good and bad ideas for research. And lastly, but not least, I want to thank also Professor Frank Kovalens, who showed up a few years ago in a union meeting in Paris, and since then we've been working together more intensively in the past years. So thank you also, Frank, for your supervision. And thank you all.
Okay. We have several presentations. 7 of the presenters are here, so we want to be sure that we have adequate time for everyone. There's some really exciting presentations today. I'm going to ask the presenters to hold to 8 minutes. Unfortunately, there's a clock up there, so it can give you an indication if you're still on background. With 4 minutes left, you're going a little too slow. So 8 minutes, and we'll have 2 minutes for questions immediately after. So, first of all, I would really like to thank, it's amazing that JATA sponsors this session today, sponsoring the travel of the presenters. It's really an amazing thing. It's the first time ever that this has been done. So, a great thank you to JATA for this. So, our first speaker is H.L. Samadoni, going to present on sensitivity and specificity of a novel nanogold assay.
Hello, my name is Hisham Samadoni. I'm a pulmonary physician from the Ministry of Health of Egypt, and I'd like to thank you very much for giving me such a great opportunity to present my work to the top worldwide professionals of the lung health research. And actually, I'm working on developing novel diagnostics for pulmonary tuberculosis using nanotechnology applications. Did you know that until now, around 35 nanoparticle-based assays have been reported in literature? Unfortunately, most of published reports didn't proceed beyond proof of concept, and translation into clinical use hasn't been reached yet. But today, I'm going to show you how a novel nanogold assay performs in real clinical settings. Oh, I'm sorry. My presentation will get through 5 main steps. First, an introduction about the fabrication concepts of the nanogold assay. Second, the aim of our study. Third, the study design and methods. Fourth, study results. And finally, our conclusions and future recommendations. So let me start with the introduction section. Tiny particles, tiny gold particles in nanoscale, which is less than 100 nanometer in size, possess unique properties when compared to atoms and bulky material, such as unique spherical shape, long-term stability, and large surface area to volume ratio. But most importantly, gold nanoparticles possess unique bright colors that vary precisely from bright red to dark violet upon increasing particle size. And these colors can be easily visualized by the naked eye. And this property have been employed, This property have been employed in developing 8 different TB nanogold assay, which strategy is based on simple colorimetric detection of TB biomarkers, such as DNA, antigen, antibody, and volatile compounds. Also, scientists observed that gold nanoparticles becomes aggregated when exposed to salt, such as sodium chloride and magnesium chloride. And this observation was attributed to the fact that salts can disrupt the negatively charged layer that coat the gold nanoparticle and make them repel by electrostatic forces. Accordingly, upon aggregation of particles, the size will increase and the color of gold solution will change from bright red to dark violet. However, when a plenty amount of DNA is present in surrounding medium, DNA molecules can absorb onto gold nanoparticle surface and protect them from being aggregated by salt. In such case, the red color of gold solution will be preserved. Now we have covered the theory. Let's see how this could be applied in TB detection. Suppose we get a sputum sample from a patient who is suspected to have pulmonary tuberculosis. First, we do DNA extraction from sample. Second, PCR is done targeting TB DNA. Third, the PCR product is added to sodium chloride, which is a salt. And finally, the red solution of the gold nanoparticles is added. Now, if the patient under investigation is actually TB positive, millions copies of TB DNA are supposed to present in this solution, which will absorb onto gold nanoparticle surface and protect them from being aggregated by salt. In such case, the red color of gold solution will be preserved. While in TB negative patients, the test solution lacks DNA abundance and the gold nanoparticles becomes exposed to salt and get aggregated, and the color of gold solution will change to dark violet. And here is a camera photo that showed the final colorimetric result of the nanogold assay when examined on real chemical samples. The total time from collecting samples to obtaining results is only 2 hours. Therefore, it was crucial to conduct a clinical study in order to evaluate sensitivity and specificity of nanogold assay in detecting patients with active pulmonary tuberculosis, and to compare its clinical performance to sputum smear microscopy and chest X-ray. The study design followed diagnostic case control, for which a total of 60 participants were recruited and enrolled into 2 groups. First, the case group, which included 20 TB positive patients. Second is a control group, which included 40 TB negative patients, patients who didn't suffer from pulmonary TB but still have any other chest disease, such as COPD or pneumonia. And the control group was subsequently divided into 2 subgroups. Subgroup A, which included 20 TB negative patients who had never been infected by pulmonary TB according to their medical history. And subgroup B, which included 20 TB negative patients who had a previous history of TB infection but currently cured after receiving treatment. And the reason for that group classification is that all TB patients who had a previous history of TB may persistently harbor TB DNA of dead TB bacilli. And since our nanogold assay is DNA-based, such patients may give false positive results when examined by the assay. Accordingly, and in order to better evaluate assay specificity, it was crucial to enroll controls who had and had not a previous history of TB infection. Enrolling patients into groups was initially based on medical history and clinical examination, result of sputum smear microscopy, and chest X-ray findings. However, final classification was based on the results of TB sputum culture using backtick measure technique, which was adopted as the reference test for this study. For each participant, 1 sputum sample were collected, of which 1.5 milliliter was examined using the nanogold assay, and the result of the sample was used for doing the culture. And the colorimetric result of nanogold assay was observed by a reader who was blinded to participants' data and the result of sputum culture. And now you can see the final results of the nanogold assay for studied patients. For active TB patients, the assay obtained red color indicating positive result, and for both subgroups of control, the assay obtained dark violet color, which indicates negative results. And in terms of accuracy, the nanogold assay obtained 95% sensitivity and 100% specificity, and the estimated diagnostic odds ratio was 1,053. This indicates the good clinical performance of the nanogold assay. Also, the log curve analysis of the gold nano assay results obtained an area under curve of 0.975, which implies the robust sensitivity of the nanogold assay. And finally, the nanogold assay obtained better clinical performance than sputum smear microscopy and chest X-ray with a difference of area under curve of 0.125 and 0.463 respectively. In conclusion, our study showed that nanogold assay is accurate with 95% sensitivity and 100% specificity. Nanogold assay is rapid with 2 hours turnaround time and performs better than sputum smear microscopy and chest X-ray, which makes it potential for use as an add-on test for detecting patients with active pulmonary TB. Future research is needed to minimize assay cost by using low-cost DNA amplification technologies, such as isothermal amplification or loop-mediated isothermal amplification. Also, for better assessment of assay accuracy, future trials should adopt the diagnostic test accuracy study design where a larger sample size are recruited. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Are there any questions from the audience? Great. We'd like to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. So, presenter, The Changing Face of Pediatric TB from Alice, is that, or Lau is your surname, I realize. Angela was close.
There we go. So my name is Angela. I'm one of the pulmonary fellows from the University of Alberta. I'm currently in my 4th year of my fellowship, and today I'll be talking about a 25-year conventional and molecular epidemiologic study of pediatric TB that we undertook in Alberta. So where exactly is Alberta? So when I tell people I'm from Canada, they usually ask whether I'm from Vancouver or Toronto. So Alberta is actually in between those two metropolitan, and it's highlighted in blue in the picture here. It is one of the 4 major immigrant-receiving provinces in Canada, and we have a population of roughly 4.2 million, and our TB incidence rates in Alberta is roughly 5.3 per 100,000. What we have seen in Canada is that the epidemiology of TB is increasingly dictated by immigration. And the influence of this trend on pediatric TB and TB elimination was previously not well reported or defined, which was one of our missions of our study. So a little bit about pediatric TB. In 2011, WHO produced their first estimate of global childhood TB that is aged less than 15 years, annual incidence of 490,000. 3 years later, they actually estimated over 1 million new cases of childhood TB, and it's now regarded to be a major contributory cause of many deaths in children under the age of 5 years old. Now, children represent about 10 to 11% of all TB cases worldwide, whereas in Canada, they represent less than 5% of TB cases. About 60% of non-Indigenous children in Canada with TB were foreign-born. Children born in Canada may acquire TB either from an infectious parent or within the extended family, or when traveling abroad frequently to visit family. The diagnosis of TB in a young child should always prompt a search for an infectious source case. So this was a 25-year conventional and molecular epidemiologic study, like I mentioned, and we included all the TB cases under the age of 15 at diagnosis between January 1st, 1990 to December 31st, 2014, reported in the Provincial TB Registry. Each case was comprehensively reviewed. The disease status of each notified pediatric TB case was validated through a review of the diagnostic data in their individual medical and laboratory records, as well as the chest X-ray of every pulmonary TB case were reread by an experienced pediatric radiologist. Only children with a positive culture for MTB or those meeting a very strict clinical case definition were considered to be pediatric TB cases and included in the final data set. Finally, we did a conventional contact tracing and molecular typing to reveal and verify linkages between the pediatric TB cases and other active TB cases notified in Alberta. Conventional contact tracing was done by the nurses in our TB program, and molecular contact tracing was done by the provincial lab, which completed routine RFLP as well as spoligal typing on all culture-positive cases. Putative source cases were considered to be verified if their MEM tuberculosis molecular profile matched that of the source case. We also did reverse contact tracing to reveal any source cases that might match temporally or spatially with a matching DNA fingerprint with a pediatric source case. Finally, culture-positive cases diagnosed in 2014 were followed up in our DNA fingerprint until the end of June 2015, which is our fingerprint window. So what we found was that the TB registry was notified of 3,817 cases during the study period, and 225 of those were children. Review of the 225 child cases found that 176 met the inclusion criteria of a pediatric TB case as defined in our study. Of the 49 cases that were excluded, 36 were culture negative and had, on retrospect, a chest x-ray which was either normal or not indicative of TB. 5 of them had culture negative extrapulmonary TB with inconclusive biopsies or biopsies that confirmed another diagnosis. These cases could be considered provider diagnosed as in literature. 8 other children were excluded because they're from a jurisdiction outside of Alberta. Of the true pediatric cases, we had 78 that had a positive culture, so that represents about 44%. In comparison, MTB was isolated from 84% of adult TB cases. You can see here, our overall incidence rates of pediatric TB in Alberta during the study years were relatively low, but there were major differences in the rates based on the population groups. Between 1990 to 2014, there was a drop in the overall incidence rate from 1.78 to 1.07 per 100,000 person years. But this relatively small change masked a remarkable decrease in the rate in the Indigenous population. So the rate in the Indigenous population actually dropped from 22.3 to 2.5 per 100,000 person year. And there's also an increase in the foreign-born rate from 7.6 to 9.6 per 100,000 person years. Foreign-born children accounted for an increasingly large proportion of total pediatric cases during the study period, from 18.9% in 1990 to 52.6% by the end of 2014. Now, breaking it down further, we see striking differences among population groups. So Indigenous and foreign-born children had age and sex-adjusted TB rates that were respectively 16 to 18 times that of other Canadian-born children. And on the pie chart there, you can see that of the 61 Canadian-born other cases, 43 or 70% of those had at least one foreign-born parent. The age of diagnosis also varied significantly by population group. However, you can see here shown in blue, children in the age group 0 to 4, regardless of the population group, had the highest rates. I'll just speed up because I think I have a minute left. In this chart here, we broke down the number of cases by 5-year periods, and as you can see, foreign-born children, shown in yellow, accounted for an increasingly large proportion of total pediatric cases during the study period, again, from 18.9% to 52.6%. And another trend was that all the Canadian-born other cases in 2005 to 2014 were all Canadian-born children from foreign-born parents. Now, shifting our focus to foreign-born children, 57 or 96.6% of the 59 children were actually born in a high TB incidence country, and 21 of these children were less than 5 years of age when they immigrated to Canada. 36% or 61% of these children were diagnosed with TB within 2 calendar years of arrival. Now, contact tracing was the most frequent means of detecting pediatric TB cases overall. Not shown on this chart here, we found that Canadian-born other foreign-born patients were 6.28 times more likely to have disease detected by symptoms rather than Indigenous populations. So compared to children whose method of detection was contact tracing or screening, children whose method of detection was symptoms were more likely to have a major public health consequence. So this included 2 children with smear-positive adult-type pulmonary TB, both were age 14, 4 CNS TB survivors, and all of the TB deaths were among children that were detected by symptomatology rather than screening or contact tracing. I'll skip over this slide here. So in conclusion, the increasing burden of pediatric TB in foreign-born children and Canadian-born children of foreign-born parents calls for more timely diagnosis of source cases and more targeted screening for latent TB infection. Children diagnosed through passive case findings have especially poor outcomes. And if their source case is only found through reverse contact tracing or molecular epidemiology, they tend to have even worse outcomes. For high-income, low-incidence countries to achieve elimination of pediatric TB, we must develop strategies that relate to both the immigration medical examination as well as screening for latent infections from children that are emigrating from high-incidence countries and to local programming. And given our global interdependence, we must do more to help low and middle income countries rid themselves of TB. Thank you.
Questions? Does anyone have any questions? I have a question. Has immigration increased over the time period you looked at from 90 to 2? Is that also like the absolute number has increased, so that contributes to the
Yes.
proportion?
So it has, I can't go back, but on my chart there, I plotted the increase in the immigration rates as well.
But it's still significantly
Still
more.
significantly more. However, our indigenous population obviously hasn't decreased, but we saw a decrease in the indigenous population rates.
As well.
Yeah.
Great, very interesting. It's amazing the resources available in other countries. So thank you very much for a great presentation. I'd now like to call up our next speaker from Thailand, going to talk about the impact of the haze crisis, particulate matter. So Suyanto Unri?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suyanto. I'm Indonesian, but studying in Prince Songkhla University, Thailand. My study is topic about impact of 2015 haze. Maybe some of you already know in our country is in the Asia. So my study is located in the Pekanbaru. What happened in the 2015? 2015, all the Asian region was blanketed with the smoke. Smoke is produced by the forest fire during the drought season. So actually this smoke occur every year. But in the 2015, there is a El Nino phenomenon, so make the drought more worse. So the impact is the haze travel around and make the people living in Pekanbaru and Sumatra collapse for almost 2 months or 3 months. So people staying indoor and they use mask. And this also impact not only for in Indonesia but also for region. So also the smoke also come to Malaysia, Singapore, and other. The worst one is in the Palangkaraya. Palangkaraya is in Kalimantan. It said 999, but actually as high as 2,000. So you can imagine how the people live that. So actually, the study have the proof that there is association between particulate matter with the TB incident, but we don't know in Indonesia, because most of studies conducted in the low TB setting, such as in the America or in Korea or in Japan. So my study is to determine the relationship between subsequently report number of TB cases per week and the ambient concentration. This study is ecological studies from the 4,000, almost more than 4,000 new cases, and we compare with the data of meteorological data. So this is the data of time series of the PM10. So during the 2015, there is a peak more than 600 microgram per millimeter cubic. So and follow it, but the increasing of the cases of the TB cases. So if we see there is a lag around 8 or 9 weeks. The first one, I do the single pollutant model. So this is just using the PM10. So in this model, PM10 concentration is increasing on leg 6 or 6 week and then leg 7. So the number is during the higher of the PM10, the cases also increase. However, after putting this model, we discussed with my advisor, we realized that haze not only contain PM, but also contain carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, and SO2 that we need also. And also haze depend on the meteorological component, like the humidity, precipitation, temperature. So in this aspect, we remodel the model. So we do cross correlation function of PM10. So our analysis data show that the incidence of TB is related with the 9 weeks after the haze. So the incidence of any given weeks has the highest correlation with PM10 concentration 9 weeks earlier. And using the quasi-Poisson regression, we put the model PM in 9 weeks, ozone, carbon monoxide, and the precipitation. But however, sulfur dioxide, temperature, wind speed, and sun hour, we don't use. And parameter, by using this parameter, we find PM10 have the significant association with the p-value less than the 0.05. So only PM10 have a linear loss relationship. The final is during the intense haze period, a doubling of the PM10 concentration 9 weeks before is associated with 4% increase of the number of TB cases. So this model is fit, and so the conclusion is there is a relationship between exposure to ambient PM10. So we recommend, so for the TB manager or TB expert in the region to consider about effect air quality should be monitored for the TB control. So if haze warning is issued in the next time, maybe TB register should ideally be part of the haze impact. However, we realize we still need the further studies to confirm the relationship between two variables and to determine the explanatory phenomenon. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Any questions? So I have 2 questions.
Yes.
Since I live in an area that I don't even think they monitor PM10, could you describe a little bit more about that? And also, can you tell me the TB diagnosis? Is it confirmed microbiologically? Because it could be clinical diagnosis and perhaps a misdiagnosis of TB, correct?
Yes, you're right. Actually, this study is part of my thesis. So in the first step, I used from the TB register, daily TB register from all the center working in my city. So including the microscopic, clinical, and radiological. So for the next step, I will separate in the step, every step of the level.
Very much. Yes. Very interesting. Simvastatin. I don't want to go more into your title, so you can introduce yourself.
Simvastatin. Hi, I'm from Mexico City. The title of the work is Insights into the Effect of Simvastatin on the Immune Response Against Mycobacterium tuberculosis. These results are initial results and preliminary results, but they are very interesting. We know that tuberculosis treatment actually is consists in different antimicrobials. However, it is necessary to shorten its duration to prevent resistance and to reduce the damage resulting from the sustained inflammation that causes permanent pulmonary disability in approximately half of surviving patients. Statins are lipid-lowering drugs that inhibits hydroxymethyl-glutarylCoA reductase. However, it has seen that statins have immunomodulatory effects in signaling pathways of the immune system. Statins have also reported antimicrobial effects and anti-inflammatory effects. The objective of this work is to evaluate the effect of simvastatin on cell phenotype and control of Mycobacterium tuberculosis growth in mononuclear cells with infected H37RB strain. 10 healthy patients were enrolled. PBMCs, peripheral blood mononuclear cells, were isolated and divided into groups. It has lasers. No. Sorry. Into groups, cells with no treatment and cells exposed to simvastatin at a concentration of 1 and 20 micromolar. 24 hours later, we evaluated cell surface phenotype by multicolor flow cytometry. Then we infected cells with Mycobacterium tuberculosis H37RB at a MOI of 1 to 10. Also, we have cells infected and treated with simvastatin to same concentrations. We evaluated again cell surface phenotype and cytokine production in cell culture supernatants. At 96 hours, we evaluated the quantification of Mycobacterium tuberculosis growth. In this graph, we can see the Mycobacterium tuberculosis growth in CFU per milliliter. The first bar represents cells without treatment. The second bar represents cells treated only with vehicle. And we can see that since the concentration of 1 micromolar, simvastatin reduces Mycobacterium tuberculosis growth, and it's more evident at a concentration of 20 micromolar. Here we can see the effect of simvastatin on the cell surface phenotype of the cells, and we can observe that simvastatin increases the percentage of NKT CD4 cells and NKT CD8 cells. We also can observe a tendency that simvastatin increases only the percentage of NK cells too. Here we are observing the effect of simvastatin on monocytes, on classic monocytes in the lower panel and on inflammatory monocytes in the upper panel. We can see that simvastatin has no effect on the percentage of these cells, but it has an effect on the expression of co-stimulatory molecules like CD80 positive and CD86. About concerning about the production of cytokine, we can observe that simvastatin has no effect in the production of interferon, TNF, or IL-17. But we can observe that simvastatin increases the production of IL-1 beta, that increases the production of IL-12, and the production of IL-10. In conclusion, we can say that simvastatin decreased the growth of Mycobacterium tuberculosis H37RB in infected PBMC. Then simvastatin improved the response of NKT and monocytes to M tuberculosis infection. That simvastatin increased the production of Th1 cytokines, IL-1 beta and IL-12, as well as the concentration of IL-10 that could potentially control the excess of inflammation that causes the damage in the patients. And these results suggest that statins could favor the immune response and limit bacterial growth in an in vitro infection model. We are doing and more experiments that go deeply in the mechanism and function of these cells. But these preliminary results are interesting.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Any questions? Please, there's a mic there, but you can just come since you're here.
Arthur Roy, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Thank you very much for that talk, and thank you for delivering it in English, even though you're obviously Spanish is your first language. Where did you get the idea for this, and what are the next steps? Where do you see this research going, and do you see its application outside of TB?
I didn't understand the first question, and the second I understand. No, I can listen because I'm trying to listen the translator, but no, please repeat.
Where did you get the idea from? And what are the next steps in this research,
Yes.
and what do you see for the future application of simvastatin, perhaps outside of TB?
Yes, this is not the first work about simvastatin. The first report was in 2014, and it was in a mouse model. We are testing in human cells, so we think that this is the next step. We are trying, the first work reported an effect on monocytes, and that favors the process of maturation of the phagolysosome. I don't know how to pronounce it, but we wanted to go deeply in the mechanism that simvastatin could favor the immune response. Something to say is that simvastatin may interact with rifampicin, that is one of the first-line drugs for tuberculosis. So we are going to prove now another statin that do not interact with rifampicin, that is rosuvastatin. And my work is basic science, so it is difficult to say that we are going to prove this in patients, but I'm in a hospital. So first of all, we have to prove that another statin that do not interact with the first-line drugs could benefit for the patients, and the next step could be to prove it in patients. I want to say that this year a retrospective study was published in Humans, and they found an association that patients that consume, that have a treatment of statins, have lower risk of active tuberculosis. So it's important, it's promiscuous, it's a good alternative. Another important thing to say is that this drug increases the cellular mechanisms of the cell. Do not is a bactericidal drug per se, but it augments the cellular mechanisms that kills the mycobacteria.
Such an excellent point in a world of increasing AMR, so it's very exciting. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Hand over to my co-chair to invite the next speaker.
So I'd like to invite next speaker. Title is Drug Resistance Tuberculosis Outbreak on Daru Island, Papua New Guinea. Presented by Arnold. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Arnold Bainamgisa. First, I want to thank the union for giving me this opportunity to present this work that is part of my PhD project at the University of Queensland in Australia, where I've been doing this work, and this is one of the first work that I did. So for the project, it's about the TB that is taking place in the Western Province of Papua New Guinea, and in this case, we looked at an island which is Daru. Daru is a small town on Daru Island. It's like 3 kilometers to the mainland of Papua New Guinea and like 200 kilometers to the mainland of Australia. And it's the capital of the Western Province of Papua New Guinea. There is high rate of TB in that province. As you can see, according to the provincial TB office, last year they estimated that actually the notification rate was over 1,000, and between 2015 2016 there were over 200 MDR cases, drug-resistant cases that were notified, and actually over 200 XDRs were notified that very year. And there's a belief that actually there's ongoing transmission, which is clinically talking to the physicians there. They tell you patients come into the clinic who have never been exposed to any treatment but having MDR or XDR TB. So, and actually on record, I think over 21 health professionals have been infected with drug-resistant TB in Daru Hospital. So, but no one knows actually what is the molecular genetics of the strain that is circulating, which is really important for the management of the disease. So, in this case, you find that most of the suspects of drug-resistant TB are routinely sent to the supranational reference lab, which is located in Brisbane, Queensland. So they do the culture and sensitivity. So for this work, we had to get ethics from University of Queensland and from Papua New Guinea. And we looked at isolates from 2012, 2015, but we were successful with at least to do whole genome sequencing on 100 isolates. So the first thing that we did was to do the global phylogeny, to relate the strains, to show what's the lineage of this strain. And in this case, most of the isolates actually were in the Beijing lineage. This is a lineage that is associated with rapid acquisition of drug resistance, associated with treatment failure, and it is transmissible. This has been showed, and 5 isolates were in the Euro-American lineage. Then we concentrated on looking at the Beijing lineage. As you can see, we did the pairwise NIP difference. As you can see, they were closely related, which shows that actually this could be a clonal transmission that is ongoing. Then we did the molecular evolution. We came up with this model using BEAST, and we came up with this tree. This tree gave us, if you look on the x-axis, it gave us that actually the strain could have been actually circulating since in the 1940s. So we mapped onto this x-axis the drugs when they came onto the market, the years when they came onto the market, and then onto the tree, we populated at least the conventional mutations that are responsible for first-line and second-line resistance. So as you can see, in clade A, there was a unique streptomycin resistance mutation in RSS gene, and then as you can see here, you can see for streptomycin, there was this conventional mutation and also the FABG1, which was really coming up early. And then we estimated that actually, as you can see, the MDR possibly could have started in the 1980s. And then we identified a unique a clade here of XDR. As you can see, these were having the GYRA mutation and also having TLY for caprimycin resistance, as you can see. Then the other aspect that we were interested in was why these 3 clades. These 3 clades had a unique mutation, and when I did some of the literature, I found that actually this mutation is in this gene, the MACP1. This MACP1 gene has been showed that actually this gene is responsible for for the bug to release its proteins to the host. So we think it's still speculative. We think that this mutation, because they showed in their work, in this mouse work that they did, they showed that actually mutation in this gene causes the bug to release more proteins into the host to elicit immune response. So that's making the bug to be more virulent. So that was speculative. And then from the tree, we were interested in knowing actually what is really acquired transmission and primary transmission. So in this case, we looked at the SNPs that were occurring onto the tree branches and those that were occurring onto the tree nodes. So the ones on the tree branches were to show the acquired resistance, and the ones on the tree nodes were to show the primary transmission. And in this case, as you can see, clade C had most of the first-line resistance mutations clustered, which was showing that is primary transmission. And then, as you can see, also clade D. And then you can see second lines. There were a few, mostly gyra that were acquired resistance, and also RSS mutation. And also you can see TLY. Most of them were due to primary transmission. Then we tried to compile the mutations. As you can see, RPOB and PNCA had the most polymorphic. They were the most polymorphic, as you can see. So we identified compensatory mutations that make this bug to be fit, especially for rifampicin resistance in RPOC and RPOA. And then we identified mutations that were in the same gene responsible for resistance for that particular in the same gene responsible for resistance, especially for rifampicin, RPOB, and ethambutol, as you can see in RPOB, and EMBB. And then the other aspect that we show, there is an NDH gene that was really, NDH frame shift mutation that was really consistent in this population. In this case, it has been shown that actually mutations in NDH gene are responsible for isoniazid resistance. In this case, we are seeing a frame shift mutation. So we think this frame shift mutation in NDH gene has a role it plays in isoniazid resistance. Then, this is supposed to be here. We identified two isolates that had a deletion that was spanning the PNCA gene, showing that actually this gene was deleted in the entire gene was deleted in the genome for those two isolates. Then we went ahead to do more investigation in isoniazid and thionamide phenotypes, looking at the different combinations of mutations and then how is it phenotypically. So as you can see, the FABG1 mutation, the promoter, and the structure gene mutation and NDH, most isolates had the higher level INH resistance and also had ethionamide resistance. And then there was an isolate that had the FABG1 mutation here and NDH, but also was ethionamide susceptible. But all in all, as you can see, most of the isolates had high level FABG1, had the FABG1 mutation having high level INH resistance and ethionamide resistance. So we didn't find the conventional mutations for ethionamide, especially in ETCHA and EHR. We didn't find mutations responsible for ethionamide. So basically, it was up to the FABG1 mutation. So you find that the currently used Hain assay that is used for detecting resistance detects only the INHA promoter mutation. And in that case, patients, when they see the mutation on the Hain assay, they are taken up to high level, to high INH treatment. But I mean, that may affect how patients, especially when patients are given the new short regimen, we think that actually it may not work for this patient because this mutation is affecting it's affecting high-level INH high-level INH and also prothionamide, which is also part of the short course regimen. And then we looked at second-line resistance. As you can see, ethionamide was mainly due to this mutation, and then the gyra was for the fluoroquinolones was mostly this mutation in gyra. And then we identified two isolates that had a unique RSS mutation. You find that they had this at this.
You're over time.
sorry. Okay. There was a mutation at the same position. This mutation G2A was having isoniazid amikacin susceptibility, but then a G2T was causing all the aminoglycosides to be resistant. For the discussion and conclusion, we were able to show a modern Beijing strain that has been circulating probably since the 1940s. It's highly fit, especially clade D. It had high diversity of mutations, which shows that actually there's evolving mutations, population mutations that are ongoing. There are forces that are ongoing within the population. So we think early diagnostics and optimized treatment based on new research should help, especially if they are doing active case findings. The limitation. So, conclusion. I want to thank everyone.
Thank you very much. So, because of time, I'd like to call next speaker. Title is the role of HIV co-infection in tuberculosis transmission in the low incidence setting of England.
Thank you for coming. I'm going to be talking today about the role of HIV co-infection in tuberculosis transmission in the low incidence setting of England, Wales and Northern Ireland over a 5-year period. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. So it's well established globally that HIV increases the risk of tuberculosis by increasing the rate of progression from latent to active disease. However, there's also some evidence from contact studies that TB patients with HIV may be less infectious. Contact studies have shown lower rates of tuberculin skin test positivity and TST conversion among the contacts of TB patients with HIV, particularly when those patients are immunosuppressed. And on a population level, strain typing of TB isolates can be used to group TB patients into clusters, which can be used as a proxy for recent transmission. In high-incidence countries, TB among people with HIV is more often due to recent infection than reactivation of LTBI, and this was confirmed by a recent systematic review and meta-analysis. However, in low-incidence settings, studies have mostly found no association between HIV and strain-type clustering, although a couple of studies have reported that TB patients with HIV are less likely to be part of clusters. However, looking at clustering as a binary variable, so whether or not a patient is part of a cluster, doesn't differentiate between infectiousness and susceptibility to infection. And in the case of HIV, this may have differential effects, which may cancel each other out and cause us to see no association. So the aim of this study was to look at the first part of this, to examine whether TB patients with HIV are less infectious than HIV-negative TB patients. And we did this by examining the association between HIV co-infection of the first case of a cluster or non-clustered patients and the number of subsequent TB cases in a strain-type cluster. To do this, we used national tuberculosis surveillance data collected by Public Health England from England, Wales and Northern Ireland from 2010 to 2014. And to determine HIV status, we linked this data to national HIV surveillance data. We included adults who were aged 15 or older with culture-confirmed tuberculosis, strain typed using 24 loci myREV-NTR. And we defined a strain type cluster as 2 or more patients with indistinguishable 23 loci myREV-NTR profiles. To define the number of subsequent cases for each TB patient, we considered whether they were part of a strain type cluster and the order of patients within clusters. So for cases with a unique strain type, we classed them as having 0 subsequent cases. And for clustered patients, we ordered patients within clusters based on the earliest date there was any evidence of TB. This included symptom onset date, the date of presentation to healthcare services, specimen date, date of diagnosis, date of treatment start, or case notification date. And we took the earliest of these dates. So in our example cluster here, the first patient to present we classed as the first patient of the cluster. And since it was a cluster of 3 patients, we kind of decided that they had 2 subsequent cases. Because it wasn't possible to determine from the myREV-NTR strain typing whether there was any within cluster transmission, we excluded the later cases from our risk factor analysis. We used a multivariable zero-inflated Poisson regression model to examine the association between HIV and the number of subsequent cases in a strain-type cluster. And these models give an output in 2 parts, an incidence rate ratio for the number of subsequent cases, and an odds ratio for the likelihood of not being infectious at all or having 0 subsequent cases. And we stratified the analysis by the site of TB disease of the first patient, so pulmonary TB with or without extrapulmonary disease or extrapulmonary disease only. So between 2010 and 2014, there were over 18,000 culture-confirmed strain-type TB patients, and this represented about 50% of notified TB cases nationally over this period. 4% of these patients were HIV positive. 43% had unique strain types and so weren't clustered. These patients had 0 subsequent cases. And over 10,000 patients were part of strain type clusters, and 20% of these were the first case of a cluster. The mean cluster size was 4.8 cases, with a median of 3 and an interquartile range of 2 to 4. So looking at the number of subsequent cases by the HIV status of the first patient in the cluster, where the first patient had pulmonary TB, we found that HIV-negative patients had a mean of 3.7 subsequent cases, whereas HIV-positive cases had a mean of 2.9 subsequent cases, indicating that they may be less infectious. However, amongst extrapulmonary TB cases, the results were similar for HIV-negative patients, who had a mean of 3.6 subsequent cases, but we found that HIV-positive first patients had a mean of 15.5 subsequent cases. These results were reflected in the regression model results. For pulmonary TB patients, there was no association between HIV status and whether they were part of a cluster or not. However, where the first patient of a cluster was HIV positive, the multivariable incidence rate ratio for the number of subsequent cases was 0.75, meaning clusters with an HIV positive first case were smaller. Amongst extrapulmonary TB patients, patients with HIV were approximately twice as likely to not be part of a cluster compared to HIV-negative extrapulmonary TB patients, with an odds ratio of 1.93. However, if they were the first case of a cluster, their clusters were substantially larger, with a multivariable incidence rate ratio for the number of subsequent cases of 3.62 for HIV-positive compared to HIV-negative patients. We also looked at the HIV prevalence among subsequent cases by the HIV status of the first patient, and found that where the first patient was HIV negative, the subsequent cases in their clusters, 3.2% of them were HIV positive, whereas when the first patient in a cluster was HIV positive, there was a HIV prevalence of 10.7% amongst the subsequent cases. From this, we can conclude that pulmonary TB patients with HIV were less infectious than HIV-negative TB patients. Their clusters were smaller. And extrapulmonary TB patients with HIV were also less likely to be the first case of a cluster. And so this fits with previous evidence that HIV infection may decrease the infectiousness of tuberculosis patients. However, clusters where the first case had extrapulmonary TB and HIV were larger, and it's unlikely that transmission was driven by these patients. They only had extrapulmonary TB. It's more likely that transmission was occurring from another undiagnosed patient with pulmonary TB who maybe wasn't detected until much later. And we also think that the larger cluster size is likely a result of higher HIV prevalence and therefore greater susceptibility among their contacts. Thank you.
Now open to question. Any question? No?
Thank you very much for your nice talk. I want to correlate with the immune status, right? You mentioned that HIV patient have the low immune status, yeah?
Yeah.
And so the cavity formation is, there is no cavity formation in the HIV patient. So infectivity is less, in the TB infectivity is less due to not forming the cavity. Some relation is there?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
So in HIV patient, due to the lower immune status, the cavity, long cavity formation, there is no long cavity formation.
Yeah, that's
so the sputum cannot transmit the TB patient.
Yeah.
Is there any correlation that with the immune status? Do you think so?
So we didn't look at CD4, I haven't looked at CD4 count of the HIV patients. We adjusted for smear status in the multivariable model, and patients who were smear negative had slightly fewer subsequent cases, but not very many, like not by very much.
So there is no any correlation, okay.
move next presentation, but so in the beginning we didn't we have two-part presenter, but now one is one person, Deputy Shrestha. You are here. Okay, yes. Please. Title is Molecular Analysis of Streptomycin Resistance, Associating Genes on Mycobacterial Tuberculosis Isolate from Nepal.
Good afternoon, all. My study is on the title Molecular Analysis of Streptomycin Resistance Associating Genes in Mycobacterium Tuberculosis Isolates from Nepal. As pulmonary tuberculosis is a major global health problem as a leading cause of death worldwide, this disease is caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Burden of TB disease. According to Global Tuberculosis Report, WHO had estimated 10.4 million new TB cases, 1.4 million TB deaths, and 480,000 new multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. Here is Nepal between highly TB burdened countries, China and India. According to National TB Program, NTP Nepal had estimated incidence rate of 158 in 100,000 population and mortality rate of 19 in 100,000 population. WHO had estimated 2.2% new cases and 15% previously treated cases for TB with rifampicin resistant MDR TB. Streptomycin is a tuberculostatic drug for the treatment of human retreatment pulmonary tuberculosis cases in Nepal. Streptomycin has been included in treatment regimen. The target site for streptomycin is asteroid ribosomal protein and 16S ribosomal RNA. Streptomycin interacts irreversibly with these target genes and has proofreading in decoding process which inhibits protein synthesis. Streptomycin resistance is associated with mutation in RPSL and RRS gene. The most common mutations have been detected in codon 43 and 88 of RPSL and 530 loop and 912 region of RRS. Few years back, mutation in a new gene, JITB, was implicated in streptomycin resistance. This enzyme, this JITB encodes this enzyme 7-methylguanosine methyltransferase M7G, which is thought to methylate G517 of 530 loop of 16S ribosomal RNA. Because of lack of genetic information on streptomycin resistance in a region with high multi-drug resistance such as Nepal, we aim to correlate between mutations in RPSL, RRS, JITB genes and streptomycin resistance in MTB isolates from Nepal. Materials and method. In total, 197 DNA samples of streptomycin resistance MDR MTB isolates which were preserved at German Nepal Tuberculosis Project Genetop were further processed for genotyping and mutation analysis at Hokkaido University. Amplification of the targeted genes were amplified by amplifier and gene sequencing were done in 3500 genetic analyzer. Results about mutation in RPSL and RRS were harbored by 80.7% of isolates. Mutation in only RPSL were harbored by 66.5%, which were very high in our study compared to RRS gene, and RRS gene were harbored by only 12.7%. Here, co-mutation in RPSL and RRS were found in 1.5% of isolates, which were unusual in our study. because RLS mutations conferring streptomycin resistance do not confer streptomycin resistant strains harboring RPSL mutation together. No mutations were found in 19.3% in our study. This might suggest that there is an involvement of other genes for the mechanism of streptomycin resistance in MTB. Detection rate of mutation in these genes vary considerably among geographical areas. The mutation in RPSL codon K43R was predominant in Southeast Asian countries, comparing with these countries, and mutation in RPSL codon K88R, RS nucleotide, and JITB were found to be very less in all the countries. Here, there were 4 different amino acid substitutions found in RPSL codon K43R, 43, 71, 88, and 118. Among these, 71 and 118 has not been previously reported. There were 7 different amino acid nucleotide were substituted found in our study, that is in 530 loop and 912 region. Here, the predominant strains, Beijing and Cas, were found in 117 and 40 isolates, which might be transmitted from the neighboring countries. The predominant mutation K43R is specific to Beijing strains were found to be more than 80%. That means these bivalent Beijing strains are spreading faster. As mutation in JITB shows highly polymorphic in nature, in our study about 13.2% of isolates showed mutation in JITB, which include these unknown mutations and reported mutations, and these include many frame shift mutation and missense mutations. This reported mutations might be contribute to streptomycin resistance. It's very difficult to analyze the mutations in the JITB. That means it is very complicated. In conclusion, mutation in RPSL and RRS are well linked to streptomycin resistance in MTB. However, the novel mutations found in RPSL and RRS doubts in contribution to streptomycin resistance. It is still in controversy about the association between JITB mutations and streptomycin resistance in MTB. Furthermore, studies needed to clarify the exact role of JITB mutation in streptomycin resistance mechanism in MTB. The findings from this study can be implemented for the establishment of rapid and effective molecular diagnostic tools in which NTP of Nepal can interrupt streptomycin resistance MTB transmission in Nepal. At last, I would like to thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you, the union.
Thank you very much. Now open to question. Any question? No? So, if no, actually, I have one question. Actually, I'm not a specialist of this area, but just I wonder, so these strains, all of them are streptomycin resistance.
Yes.
So to confirm mutation, responsibility of mutation to streptomycin resistance, we don't need to check streptomycin susceptible strain. We don't need.
Yes, of course we need that one also. In future, I would like to do that also. Yes. Thank you very much for your suggestion. Thank you.
Next presentation. So, title is Molecular Epidemiology of M. bovius among patients with pulmonary TB in Ethiopia by Murubok Getafun. Please, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the union for considering our work. My presentation is on molecular epidemiology of amoebovis among patients with pulmonary TB in Ethiopia. I'm sorry. Okay. To give you some background information about Ethiopia, Ethiopia has large number of livestock. There are about 104 million livestock in the country. And globally, there was a study that were conducted by WHO region to estimate the contribution of zoonotic TB on human infection. Based on their estimate, in Africa, it was about 7 per 100 population per year. For this incidence, 3 countries contribute the biggest share, and Ethiopia was one of them. According to the estimate, the median proportion of TB caused by amoebovis in Ethiopia was 17%. The likelihood of having TB, bovine TB in Ethiopia is most likely because animals share the same shelter as human and raw milk consumption is common. This is a number of studies are conducted in the country. This is a recent review that was done on 127 studies. Based on this review, there are 2 factors that contribute on the prevalence of bovine TB. One is the farm management, the other one is the breed type. Based on the farm management, there are 2 types of farm management. Extensive, which means small farm. The other one is intensive, that's a large farm. And the prevalence in small farm is 4.5, whereas in intensive and semi-intensive, it's almost 4 times higher. The other factor that contribute for the bovine TB is the type of breed they have. In Zebu breed, the prevalence is 4.1, whereas in Holstein, it's 21.66. This is to show you the distribution of bovine TB in the country. The large dots that indicates the prevalence is higher. It's aggregated in urban area, which means in where the semi-intensive and intensive farms are located. This is to show you the previous work that was done in human. Those who report on pulmonary and as well as in extrapulmonary TB was summarized. Based on this previous study, the average prevalence in pulmonary TB is 1.6%, whereas in extrapulmonary TB is 2.3%. And the objective of this study was to describe the contribution of bovine TB cases as a causative agent of pulmonary TB in Ethiopia. The study was conducted on stored samples that was collected on 32 diagnostic centers for DRS. All new and smear positive, previously treated smear positive are recruited for the DRS purpose during 2011 up to 2013. The sample size for DRS was determined based on the newly registered smear positive and % of reference stance. All regions from the Ethiopia were contributed for the study. And from the collected sample, identification from Mycobacterium complex from other Mycobacterium was done by capilla from culture specimen. For this specific test, deletion typing was done. The deletion typing was based on the presence and absence of the spacer. Based on the accordingly, we use 9 to classify TB from other TB complex. The spacer 9 is present in MTB, whereas it's absent in other MTB complex. And we use spacer 4 to classify amoebovis from other MTB complex. Spacer 4 is deleted in amoebovis, but it's intact in other MTB complex. Based on this, we do RD9 and RD4. If RD9 is intact, it's classified as MTB. If RD9 is deleted, it's classified as no TB. If it is RDD9 is deleted, we do RDD4. If RDD4 is deleted, we classify it as M. bovis. And our result, a total of 1,785 sample was collected for the diaries purpose, and typing was done for 97% of the isolates, and 92% of the isolates were having either RDD9 intact or RDD9 deleted. Most of the sample are from culture, but some were, the typing was on smear positive sediment. This is to show the gel picture of RDD9. The first line is the ladder, and the second one is H37. The third one is BCG. The fourth one is molecular distilled water. The rest is our sample. Based on RDD9 typing, 99.87% of the cases were MTB. Based on RDD4 typing, 0.13% of the cases were M. bovis. On summary, this is the largest study ever conducted in Ethiopia to identify bovine TB in pulmonary TB patients. Isolates from every region of Ethiopia were tested. The frequency of bovine TB in our study was very well, despite the high prevalence of bovine TB among cattle. This could be by two reasons. Majority of Ethiopian cattle are zebu, and they use extensive farm management, what is the small farm. The low prevalence in human might be due to the low prevalence in the extensive farm and in zebu cattle, which represent most of the rural population. This finding understands the contribution of bovine TB in human will have an important implication for the program, the national program intervention. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge all the individuals and organizations who contribute for this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now open to question. Any question? Yeah.
So you're only looking at M. bovis, but do you think will you maybe go back and look at some of the other mycobacterial types? Like for the ones that goats carry and other zoonotic TB?
You mean from the complex?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, we are looking, let me show you here maybe. Okay, you are looking deletion typing from the complex already specified.
So it includes all of them. So even though, because the other ones are already eliminated before bovis.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all are covered.
Okay. Very interesting. Thanks.
Any question from floor? Yes.
Interesting talk. While culturing the mycobacterium, did you use the pyruvate? Because Mycobacterium bovis require the pyruvate, you know, right? So did you use, and if you had used, then percentage could be higher. How did you culture the bacteria?
Okay, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
We didn't use pyruvate, we use glycerol-based media, but we do the deletion type based on culture as well as smear. Since it's a molecular technique, it can be picked by from the sediment, so we didn't miss any bovis.
Okay, another question. What could be the reason that the Mycobacterium bovis transmitted from animal to human? In Ethiopia, do the people drink milk, raw milk, or like that?
Yes.
That can be the reason?
Yeah, there is a common practice in rural population. Almost 8% of the Ethiopian population are living in rural area. And raw milk consumption is common in a rural area. Despite that, the prevalence is low.
Oh, okay.
So thank you very much. Thank you. To move next presentation. But yeah, last time, yes. Recommended age at BCG vaccination. Rebecca.
Brilliant. Good afternoon. My name's Partho Roy. Delighted to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'd like to present our work today, which is called Recommended Age of BCG Vaccination and Modelling the Impact on Global Paediatric TB Mortality. So, as you may know, the WHO recommends in high-burden TB settings that a single dose of BCG vaccine should be given to all HIV-negative infants as soon as possible after birth. And this is based on the WHO position papers from 2004 and 2007. The WHO are currently undertaking a review of the existing BCG vaccine recommendations, and specifically the recommendation on the timing of BCG vaccination. Together with the WHO, we formulated the following primary research question, and that was, what would be the impact on global pediatric TB deaths if BCG was recommended at birth, or at 6 weeks, or at 6 months, or at 1 year of age? I'd like to present a summary of our findings here, and then I'll go on to tell you how we reached these findings. So we found that the greatest reduction in childhood TB deaths would occur if existing delays in BCG vaccination could be eliminated. Most scenarios, delayed vaccination would be anticipated to increase global pediatric TB mortality. However, BCG co-administration with the first diphtheria tetanus pertussis vaccine, DTP1, recommended at 6 weeks of age, may result in a small reduction in TB mortality if final BCG coverage were able to reach DTP1 coverage levels. So how did we reach these conclusions? We built a static mathematical model, and we calibrated it to the 2015 number of HIV-negative global TB deaths, which was estimated to be 169,000, according to the Global TB Report. An estimated 83% of those childhood TB deaths occur in children aged 0 to 4, and this was incorporated into our model. We used the current coverage by age distribution of BCG vaccine globally, and I'll talk more about that in a second. And together, these parameters formed our baseline scenario, in which we calculated the individual risk of TB death in unprotected individuals, and unprotected individuals were defined as those who had either not received the vaccine or who had received the vaccine but weren't sufficiently protected. We accounted for uncertainty in our model parameters by random sampling from key parameters 100,000 times. So it's important to state our key assumptions, and these were that BCG vaccine efficacy against TB death was assumed to be the same regardless of age of administration. We also assumed that protection against TB death lasted for the 15-year model time horizon, with no waning over this time frame. We constructed 12 hypothetical implementation scenarios where BCG is recommended either at birth, 6 weeks, 6 months, or 1 year of age. And we estimated the total number of TB deaths per global birth cohort in the baseline scenario and each of these 12 hypothetical scenarios. So this graph here shows BCG vaccine coverage by age globally. And what it shows is that 33% of the global BCG eligible birth cohort actually received BCG in the first week of life. 50% coverage was achieved between 3 and 4 weeks of age. And the final coverage of estimate of 89.4% was only achieved about 2 years and 7 months of age. We're able to plot similar graphs for DTP1, and also the first measles-containing vaccine, which is recommended at either 9 months or 12 months in most low and middle-income countries, shown here in orange. So using these curves, we were able to create various implementation scenarios. So this was our baseline BCG coverage by age distribution. We considered what would happen if we achieved 89.4% coverage at birth, 100% coverage at birth, various scenarios at 6 weeks, including co-administration with DTP1, where the final coverage reached either 89% or 92%, which was DTP1 final coverage, or if we shifted the baseline BCG distribution by 6 weeks. We also considered various implementation scenarios at 6 months and 12 months, and this graph here shows all the various implementation scenarios we considered. So this slide here summarizes our main findings, and it shows the median percentage change in TB deaths in each scenario compared to the baseline scenario compared to the uncertainty ranges. And the main findings are as follows. So firstly, in the scenarios which considered 89% or 100% coverage at birth, we see a reduction in global pediatric TB mortality. In most other scenarios of delayed vaccination, as shown on the left, shown here, we see an increase in pediatric mortality with greater delays associated with greater mortality. Thirdly, BCG co-administration with DTP1 may result in an increase in global pediatric TB deaths or a decrease in global pediatric TB deaths, depending on our final BCG coverage. And lastly, you may have noticed the wide uncertainty ranges, which are represented here by the error bars. So 97% of that uncertainty is due to one single parameter, that's BCG vaccine efficacy against TB death, which range from 8 to 88%. However, overlapping uncertainty ranges should not be interpreted as a lack of difference between scenarios. Instead, they show what the potential impact could be at a certain level of vaccine efficacy. So, for example, if vaccine efficacy was 88%, then the potential impact would be at the lower end here of these bars where mortality is reduced, and the upper end here where mortality is increased. Therefore, regardless of vaccine efficacy, the relative difference between each scenario is not affected. Lastly, if improved data became available on estimates of vaccine efficacy, then much of this uncertainty would be removed. So our headline results are as follows. If we achieved 89.4% coverage at birth, we estimated 2.9% median decrease in global pediatric TB deaths. Co-administration with DTP1 would result in a 1.8% median increase in TB deaths if BCG coverage remained the same. However, BCG co-administration with DTP1, where coverage reached that of DTP1 levels, was associated with a 2.1 median decrease in TB deaths. So in conclusion, the greatest reduction in childhood TB deaths would occur if existing delays in BCG vaccination could be eliminated. Most scenarios delayed vaccination would be anticipated to increase global pediatric TB mortality. However, BCG co-administration with DTP1, recommended at 6 weeks of age, may result in a small reduction in TB mortality if final BCG coverage were able to reach DTP1 coverage levels. Therefore, if recommending vaccination at 6 weeks, the overall direction of impact may be dependent entirely on implementation considerations. Finally, WHO policymakers should consider the feasibility of achieving earlier vaccination or increased coverage if the current BCG recommendations are to be updated. So I'd like to thank the WHO for providing financial support to LSHTM TB Modelling Group and our collaborators, and thank you for listening.
Presentation. Now open to question.
Can I just get some water before?
Yeah, questions on, almost getting it exactly to 8 minutes. But so what about HIV in higher incidence HIV settings? Are you going to look at like a sub-analysis for countries with, with the risk of
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
So our model is based on HIV negative deaths because BCG administration obviously is contraindicated in HIV deaths. Yes, it's the majority of global pediatric TB deaths, the vast majority of them are actually in HIV negative individuals. It's actually difficult to model the effect in HIV positive. It's something that could be certainly extended in this work. It's actually difficult to determine how many of those individuals are actually born with HIV and how many are. There aren't actually estimates available for that as far as I'm aware.
or even HIV exposure?
Yeah,
Yes, because
yeah,
we're
yeah.
not certain what the actual the sensitivities are.
No, great question, but yeah, no, absolutely options for future work, yeah.
Any other questions? Well, great, thank you very much. We're not too much over time, just like 3 minutes. I'll give it back to you, but I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much to Jata. We'll let you for sponsoring this session. It really is, I have to say I'm so impressed. Sitting here, there's 8 different countries represented and there are more women than men, which I think is a first at this conference. So it makes me very excited that we're all here. So I think, do we want to get a picture of all of them together or no? You're all still here, yes? Can we get a picture of all you together with our JATA representative? I think that would be great.